Well, hello there. We're going to try this again. This is my second attempt. My voice was all full of frogs the first time, so we're doing this again. Welcome. It is, for me, it's Sunday, May 3rd, apparently kind of early in the morning, and I don't even know what day of the great quarantine of 2020 we're on. I've definitely lost track, but anyways, we are going to talk about the book of Omni today. A fascinating, tiny little one-chapter book of the Book of Mormon. Very cool. Covers a very long distance of years. Not quite the most, number of years and the fewest number of chapters or verses. That honor takes place later on in the Book of Mormon. But this is second place. And we're going to ask the question, do we partake of the power of his redemption? Of course, meaning the Savior. So what we want to do first, let's come over and look at a quick timeline and see what we're going to do. So, along the bottom here, not trying to click on things. Along the bottom here, we've got the years, and we start this whole adventure, you remember, around 600 BC. That's when Lehi and his family left Jerusalem and headed off for the grand adventure. And so we've had, Nephi, the man, in here. His brother Jacob takes over. Jacob's ministry stretches for quite a long time. Now, these little lines and whatnot, it's all very approximate, and it's not indicated to, not meant to indicate their actual lives, as much as the dates that are estimated at the points where they check in with us in the scriptures. And so Jacob's ministry covers quite a span. And then his son, he hands it off to his son Enos, who takes it for the next 40 years. Enos hands it off to his son. Remember, Enos was the hunter. Oh, well, he went off to hunt. I don't know if he was a hunter. Hands it off to his son Jerem, who we heard from last. And now what happens is Jerem is going to hand it off to his son Omni, and it's going to go boom, 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 boom. And it's just like, gosh, I don't know, as densely packed as the writing is. I'll bet that this is just one side of one plate on the golden plates. But remember, all of what we've seen so far, every little word that we've read has been on the small plates of Nephi, which are different from the collection that becomes the large plates of Nephi. We'll talk more about that. Also, we're going to meet Kings Benjamin and Mosiah coming up after. Anyways, so So starting from 600 BC, we get quite a few pages of scripture in here and lots of awesome teaching, really neat stuff, right? But when we get into here, we're going to see very little gospel, very little prophesying or anything like that. And mostly just high by, and a lot of wars and bloodshed and badness. And it's going to take us all the way up to about 120 BC. So, ready to jump in? Book of Omni, only chapter, verse 1. Behold, it came to pass that I, Omni, being commanded by my father Jerem, that I should write somewhat upon these plates to preserve our genealogy. Wherefore, in my days I would that ye should know that I fought much with the sword to preserve my people, the Nephites, from falling into the hands of their enemies, the Lamanites. But behold, I of myself am a wicked man, and I have not kept the statutes and the commandments of the Lord as I ought to have done. And it came to pass that 276 years had passed away, and we had many seasons of peace, and we had many seasons of serious war and bloodshed. Yea, and in fine, 282 years had passed away, and I had kept these plates according to the commandments of my fathers, and I conferred them upon my son Amram, and I make an end. Boom, just like that. So isn't this interesting? My guess is that probably Omni sat down twice to write, just a guess, because he gives us two different time points, right? So 276 years, and then later 282 years, right? So it might, it seems like. Now, here's an interesting thing. Omni. This is the only writer in the scriptures that we're aware of, that I'm aware of, who refers to himself as a wicked man, right? There are plenty of wicked men whose stories are told in the scriptures, but as far as we know, Omni is the only, shall we say, self-professed wicked man. And so that's interesting. And I wonder, was he being hard on himself? We know he's a warrior, right? And it could, I imagine, it is probably a great challenge to anybody who is who has to go to war, who has to take the lives of others. It is probably a great challenge for them to come to peace with that. Which is not to say that there's anything wicked about righteous warfare or however you want to look at that exactly. So there's nothing negative about that, and yet I suspect that it's a struggle for each soldier, each warrior individually. And obviously, I know nothing of this from personal experience, but to have to do something that extreme. And so I wonder if perhaps he struggled with this. Obviously, he doesn't single any particular thing out. He says he has not kept the statutes and commandments of the Lord as he ought to have done. But it's interesting that he clearly knows what he ought to have done. So his father Jeram clearly taught him the right things, and he knew what was right. And we have to credit Omni, because not only did he take the time, and you have to assume that it was not a small thing to learn the language of the Reformed Egyptian to be able to write on these records like that. That must have taken time and dedication as he was being raised to learn that. And then clearly he taught it to his son, right, Amaron. And so whatever Omni was, however he condemns himself, we know that, or at least I would say that there was a lot good about Omni, and we're grateful for his sacrifice and contribution. Anyways, this little diagram, of course, I flipped time on its side, but this is showing now we have, this is the plates. So we got the large plates of Nephi, and those plates were being kept from the time of Nephi, right? Nephi had two sets of plates. He had the large ones, which had all the details, the book of Lehi and everything in it, and all the full details. And then remember, way back early, the Lord commanded him to take make a second set of plates and keep those just for the strictly most important spiritual things. And so those separated then, and Nephi sent the one set over with his brother Jacob. And then now here they come down the family of Jacob, his descendants, and the large plates stayed with the kings. We don't know who the kings were, whether or not they were descendants of Nephi. They certainly could have been, but we are not told. We are told that they took the name of Nephi, but clearly that practice ended by the time we're gonna meet King Messiah, who was King Messiah, not King Nephi the Ninth or anything like that. So, anyways, let's keep going. And now I, Amaron, so this is son of Omni, write a few things whatsoever I write, which are few, in the book of my father. Behold, it came to pass that 320 years had passed away, and the more wicked part of the Nephites were destroyed. That's interesting. How were they destroyed? He doesn't tell us exactly, but I think we can deduce, somewhat. But it is interesting. So I guess the good news is that Amaron, whereas his father labeled himself a wicked man, Amaron is at least not in so much that he's saying the more wicked part of the Nephites were destroyed. So maybe at least we can hope that he's not more wicked. But I think we see that he's just fine. For the Lord would not suffer, after he had led them out of the land of Jerusalem and kept and preserved them from falling into the hands of their enemies, yea, he would not suffer that the words should not be verified, which he spake unto our fathers, saying that inasmuch as ye will not keep my commandments, ye shall not prosper in the land. Wherefore the Lord did visit them in great judgment. Nevertheless, he did spare the righteous, that they should not perish, but did deliver them out of the hands of their enemies. So, and I think that's the hint that that suggests to us that the way that the more wicked part of the Nephites were destroyed was probably at the hands of the Lamanites in battle, or something like that. And it came to pass that I did deliver the plates unto my brother Chemish. All right, so Ammoron didn't spend too much time, but it's important to see that even in those early days, the Lord is keeping his commandments, and that it's not just random or arbitrary, the effect of the conflicts, assuming that this is what he's talking about, the conflicts with the Lamanites, that through some means it would appear that it is the more wicked part of the Nephites that are lost to the Lamanites. As we go on forward, we see that this continues to be true, and it's never exclusively true. It's not to say that the bad things don't happen to good people. Of course, we know that they do, and even in the battles, it's not to say that only the wicked people die. That's not true either. But we also know, like from the war chapters and just in the greater detail that we get later in the Book of Mormon, that when the Nephites were particularly righteous, they fought better. They fought with the strength of the Lord, and so fewer of them died. But when they lost the Spirit of the Lord and were fighting just out of anger or pride or whatever it might be, that more of them died. And so it is, the Lord sifts, and he keeps his promises. Now I, Chemish, write what few things I write in the same book with my brother, for behold, I saw the last which he wrote, that he wrote it with his own hand, and he wrote it in the day that he delivered them unto me, them being the plates. And after this manner we keep the records, for it is according to the commandments of our fathers, and I make an end. So there you go, Chemish, the one-verse wonder. And isn't that interesting? Once again, it is so interesting that they don't have a lot to say, and maybe nothing really to contribute, and yet we have to give them credit because they passed along the records, they passed along the knowledge, right? Because now Abinadom, the son of Chemish, is going to take over. So Chemish learned enough that he was able to write and to teach Abinadom, assuming that the teaching goes from father to son. Now, who knows? Maybe they had, okay, kids, it's time to go to Reformed Egyptian class just in case you get the records. Who knows? We also don't know. It's possible Ammoron had no children, and so and maybe they kind of saw that coming, and so Chemish had time and knew that he was going to end up with it, and that it would pass on to his son Abinadom. We don't know how old these people were when they took over the records either. So who knows? Who knows? But it is interesting to see that they made sure that it continued. Right? They took care of it, and the Lord enabled them to do so. It's hard to imagine in today's day and age, a family keeping track of some, crazy unknown language like that. Anyways, behold, I, Abinadom, am the son of Chemish. Behold, it came to pass that I saw much war and contention between my people, the Nephites, and the Lamanites. And I with my own sword have taken the lives of many of the Lamanites in the defense of my brethren. And behold, the record of this people is engraven upon plates, which is had by the kings, according to the generations. And I know of no revelation save that which has been written, neither prophecy, wherefore that which is sufficient is written, and I make an end. So there you go. He's not saying that nothing happened during his lifetime of a spiritual nature. He's just saying that it was already covered, so there's no need to add to it. Behold, I am Amaleki, the son of Abinadom. Behold, I will speak unto you somewhat concerning Mosiah, who was made king over the land of Zarahemla. For behold, what's Zarahemla? Well, let's find out. For behold, he being warned of the Lord that he should flee out of the land of Nephi, and as many as would hearken unto the voice of the Lord should also depart out of the land with him into the wilderness. Pause. Stop and think about that for a minute. So we know already that their population was many thousands, right? And imagine that one day your king wakes up and says, hey, let's leave our entire country. Everything that we know of as home, let's just leave. Because I was warned by the Lord that we need to leave. And we're going to go to places we've never been, that we have no idea, We're just heading north, down, and we'll find what we find when we get there. Who's with me? Can you imagine that? That must have taken a lot of faith. And imagine then the debates and all. And we don't know that there's no indication here that that they snuck out. There were times when groups, would sneak out quietly, but it does say that they should flee out of the land, which does give the indication of, hey, so in 6 months, let's prepare, to go slowly. It sounds more like, no, you got to grab what you're going to grab and let's go. So very, very interesting. And obviously many went. And it came to pass that he did according as the Lord had commanded him. And they departed out of the land into the wilderness, as many as would hearken unto the voice of the Lord. And they were led by many preachings and prophesyings. And they were admonished continually by the word of God. And they were led by the power of his arm through the wilderness until they came down into the land which is called the land of Zarahemla. Now let's look at the map before we get to verse 14. So they were down here in this lower circle thing. Now this map, by the way, this map is what is called an internal map of the Book of Mormon lands. It is not, it is not meant to correspond directly with any actual geographic anything on planet Earth. It could. There are several places you could take, and if you sort of, kind of stretched and squoze, and you could take and plot this down on a couple of different places. I've heard very convincing arguments for 3 different locations. The Central America, Mesoamerica, that area. Lots of evidence and convincing arguments for that. I've heard Baja California, and I've heard some very fascinating, very convincing evidence for that. And I've also heard the Heartland area up near the Great Lakes of North America. I've heard and seen very convincing arguments and evidence for those. All 3 of them, they're like, whoa, that is so cool. That must be right. And they all fit in my scrambly brain. Obviously, they can't all 3 be right, at least not in the traditional sense. I think it's entirely possible that what could be is that they spread over all of those 3 areas, but the arguments are that they were contained in this area, contained in that area, contained in the other area. I don't know. This is not any of that. So what they did, this is brought to us by our friends at Virtual Scriptures. And so what they've done, it's actually really neat. And they put just tons of work into this, tons, like years. I think they've been developing this over a 10-year period. And so what they do is there's so many little references inside the Book of Mormon about, and I went northward and I went here and so many days march and this many far and whatever, and crossed over the waters and the sea and over the river and through the woods. And so based on all those little internal references, they're able to say, well, relatively speaking, we think that this is here relative to this, and this is here relative to that, and that this is this far away, and this is this close, and that there's this, topographical feature in between here and there, rivers and mountains and waters and things like that. And so it's actually a very usable and fairly accurate map that shows, relatively speaking, where the different things are. Okay, so does that make sense? So we can, and this will come into play more later as we talk, especially when we're talking about people moving places or armies marching or different things, because then you get to see what they're close to. And it really does bring out some holy cow, some observations to realize, if they were from here to here and that to that, and they were right next to, and wow. Anyways, we'll get to more of that later. But one of the interesting things, they always say going down to the land of Zarahemla and going up to the land of Nephi. Now, we have no idea if they knew what north they did. They talk about northward and southward. They clearly do, and east and west. So they understand essentially the compass and what those different things mean. But when they talk about up and down in their speech, they don't use it the same way we do, where when we say up, we mean north, and when we say down, we mean south. When they say up, they mean elevation, because they're hiking. They're not in their car just like cruising along. So the impression that we get is Nephi is a higher elevation. This whole land of Nephi is maybe up in a mountainous area or just highlands, and Zarahemla is in the land of Zarahemla is in a lower elevation. Just interesting. Anyway, so they left Nephi, the whole group, and they traveled north, led by the Lord. I don't think it was. Who knows how squiggly the path was? I have no idea. I just made it squiggly. Excuse me. Sorry. And they ended up in the land of Zarahemla, and it's estimated that it was about a 3-week trip to go from Nephi to Zarahemla. That information isn't in this section that we just read, but from other references, because these two lands are going to occupy the focus of the whole rest of the Book of Mormon. So, anyways, so there's your internal map. We'll come back to that quite a bit in the future, and let's move on. So, verse 14, and they, so the people of Mosiah, they discovered a people who were called the people of Zarahemla. Now there was great rejoicing among the people of Zarahemla, and this is fascinating, by the way. And also, Zarahemla, the man, sorry, the king of the people of Zarahemla's name was Zarahemla. Sorry. Did rejoice. So Zarahemla himself did rejoice exceedingly. Why? Because the Lord had sent the people of Mosiah with the plates of brass, which contained the record of the Jews. Now, something fascinating is about to happen here. Think about it. So, we don't know whether the people of Mosiah were more advanced in terms of technology, or we don't know really how their numbers compared. I assume that the people of Mosiah were smaller in number from the people of Zarahemla. But how often is it that, especially, back in those days, that, this big stampede of people shows up and you're rejoicing about it? Normally they'd be like, wait a second, are you an invading army? What's going on here? We like things the way they are. But in fact, we see here Zarahemla and the people of Zarahemla, and they're excited, right? They rejoiced exceedingly because the Lord had sent the people of Mosiah with what? With what? With the plates of brass, which contain the record of the Jews. Now let's see why that mattered. Behold, it came to pass that Mosiah discovered that the people of Zarahemla came out from Jerusalem at the time that Zedekiah, king of Judah, was carried away captive into Babylon. So that was probably 15 minutes. Well, it wasn't. It was a couple of years after Lehi left Jerusalem. Remember? It took them 8 years through the wilderness, and then another year basically to get to the promised land. So maybe 9 years, right? And that was when they prophesied that Jerusalem had been destroyed, right? And that was then. That's King Zedekiah is gone. They've all been taken captive into Babylon, and I think I have those times right. Anyways, I'm just trying not to get Assyria and Babylon mixed up. Doesn't really matter. The point is that so the people of Zarahemla came from Jerusalem, right? And so they're cousins, essentially. They have the same original culture. But it had been many hundreds of years now that the people of Zarahemla had been living in the new world, in the promised land. But the Lord had brought them there. Verse 16, and they journeyed in the wilderness. Speaking of the people of Zarahemla, they journeyed in the wilderness and were brought by the hand of the Lord across the great waters into the land where Mosiah discovered them. And they had dwelt there from that time forth. Okay, so interesting. So these are cousins. They're of Jewish descent from Jerusalem. And at the time that Mosiah discovered them, they, the people of Zarahemla, had become exceedingly numerous. Nevertheless, they had had many wars and serious contentions. Sound familiar? And fallen by the sword from time to time. Sound familiar? Now here's where it differs. And their language had become corrupted, and they had brought no records with them, and they denied the being of their Creator. And Messiah nor the people of Messiah could understand them. So that's interesting. That's very interesting. What happens when you take off with your people to a new land and you forget to bring your books with you? Everything gets messed up, right? Your language completely gets corrupted, so it's not even understandable anymore. The very same language that Lehi and those guys spoke. Imagine how much change had to have taken place that they couldn't even understand them anymore. And more importantly, they denied the being of their Creator. They completely lost their faith because it just eroded away after over time, because there was no anchor of documented scripture to refer back to as the unswerving standard. But it came to pass that Messiah caused that they, the people of Zarahemla, should be taught in his language. And it came to pass that after they were taught in the language of Messiah, Zarahemla gave a genealogy of his fathers according to his memory, and they are written, but not in these plates. So isn't that interesting that Messiah, because their language was maintained, was able to teach his language to the people of Zarahemla. Now, they were probably very similar in terms of grammar and, a lot of those core words. So it probably wasn't a complete stretch for them to learn it. And it made sense that they would go in that direction, learning the pure language, not learning the corrupted language. But anyways, very interesting. And it came to pass, now this is fascinating. It came to pass that the people of Zarahemla and of Mosiah did unite together, and Mosiah was appointed to be their king. Isn't that fascinating? So, think now about the people of Zarahemla. Remember, they rejoiced exceedingly because the people of Mosiah showed up with their records, right? So even though they had lost the knowledge of their Savior, of their God, there must have been something missing there, right? Because they rejoiced exceedingly when it finally arrived. They must have known, hey, we're missing this. We have nothing. We're without a past, and this stinks. And we would like to. And so, were they hoping for it, watching for it, praying for it? Who knows? But they were missing it enough. There was enough of a hole there in their sense of self and completeness that they rejoiced exceedingly when it showed up, it being Mosiah and his people, and it being the brass plates and the scriptures. And it restored their history. So now they were able to recall where they came from and what their ancient history was. And it came to pass, and so much so, and just isn't it fascinating? Here's King Zarahemla of a huge population willing to step down and to say, Mosiah, why don't you take this? Why don't you take over and you be king? When does that ever happen? That is just kind of mind-blowing. You can see the Lord's hand going there, that they must have been very carefully prepared to be able to allow this to happen. And isn't it a good thing, right? Because the people of Mosiah had not only the Lamanites, but now they're going to have the rest of their own population that they left behind, basically very unhappy with them and on their tails. And it came to pass in the days of Mosiah, there was a large stone brought unto him with engravings on it. And he did interpret the engravings by the gift and power of God. Now that's an interesting thing there too. What he's referring to there are the Urim and Thummim, and we're missing the account of where they got the Urim and Thummim. Guess where that account was given? That's in the lost 116 pages. We know from accounts that story was in there. And they gave the stones, large stones. By the way, the pictures here, these are just 3 large stones that have been found in Mesoamerica, all that they tell stories, right? Different, the 3 stone, they're each different 3 stones. And you see this one on the right here, there's a person standing. So that's like 4 or 5 times the height of an adult. So that's a large stone. And we have no idea when they say large stone, did they mean this large of a large stone, or do they mean something different? I don't know. But this is just showing examples that the people in this time period definitely did write on stones. And they gave an account of one Coriantumr and the slain of his people. And Coriantumr was discovered by the people of Zarahemla, and he dwelt with them for the space of 9 moons. Also very interesting. So remember, in this that we're reading now, the entire small plates of Nephi, it is unabridged. It is exactly the words that they wrote or scratched in, the characters into the plates. So, with no interpretation, no nothing, which is why these plates they're so cool, because you'll get weird, funky little, random things tossed in there. We're going to see some more of that coming up. Whereas then once we get into the abridged section that Mormon and Moroni abridged for us, then it becomes very smooth and edited, and it's neat. It's awesome in different ways, because now we get the lessons kind of bubbled up, and there aren't any weird little random side trip comments. But this was interesting because they talk about the space of 9 moons, but once we get into the rest of it all, they don't talk about moons anymore. They talk about months. So it's just interesting to see that Mormon, who abridged the record, 400 years, 500 years later, 600 years maybe, after this, 500, whatever, that the language had at least evolved enough that they were using a different term in that sense. So, sorry, speaking of random side trips. Okay, it also spake a few words concerning, the stone that is, concerning his fathers, the fathers of Coriantumr. And his first parents came out from the tower at the time the Lord confounded the language of the people. Which tower is he talking about? That's right, the Tower of Babel. So the fathers of Coriantumr go way back in history. And the severity of the Lord fell upon them according to his judgments, which are just, and their bones lie scattered in the land northward. Lots of bones. And behold, I, Amaleki, was born in the days of Mosiah, and I have lived to see his death. And Benjamin, his son, reigneth in his stead. And behold, I have seen in the days of King Benjamin a serious war and much bloodshed between the Nephites and the Lamanites. But behold, the Nephites did obtain much advantage over them, yea, insomuch that King Benjamin did drive them out of the land of Zarahemla. So here we are back to this internal map again. And you can just imagine there's that mountain range, and that's kind of the dividing line. And up above here are the Nephite lands, which is now known as the land of Zarahemla. And below, in the south, or above, geographically speaking, elevation-wise, is, just to keep it complicated, are the Nephite lands, which we call the land of Nephi, because it was the land that was settled by Nephi, and the main city is the city of Nephi. So, if you're a Nephite, you live in Zarahemla. If you're a Lamanite, you live in Nephi. Does that make sense? Yep. Now, imagine the surprise, though, on the faces of the Lamanites when they came up to battle against the Nephites, who have now been joined by the people of Zarahemla. This massive population of people who probably have a very different manner of warfare and everything. Anyways, that I just kind of wonder, what were they? How shocked were they? And it came to pass that I began to be old, and having no seed, children, and knowing King Benjamin to be a just man before the Lord, wherefore I shall deliver up these plates unto him, exhorting all men to come unto God, the Holy One of Israel, and believe in prophesying, and in revelations, and in the ministering of angels, and in the gift of speaking with tongues, and in the gift of interpreting languages, and in all things which are good. For there is nothing which is good, save it comes from the Lord, and that which is evil cometh from the devil. And now, my beloved brethren, I would that ye should come unto Christ, who is the Holy One of Israel, and partake of his salvation, and the power of his redemption. Yea, come unto him, and offer your whole souls as an offering unto him, and continue in fasting and praying, and endure to the end. And as the Lord liveth, ye will be saved. Now, we don't think much about the book of Omni and about Amaleki, But boy, if you take these two verses, just these two, it's kind of like Moroni chapter 10, all shrunk down into two verses. Moroni chapter 10 is the very last chapter in the Book of Mormon, and it is powerful. And even he uses the term "come unto Christ" and be perfected in him. And he really covers a very similar thing, only he expands on it, and it's amazing. But holy cow, Amaleki, we pass over him so easily. But this is powerful, and you can tell he's kind of signing off. It's a very I don't want to trivialize it at all, but it's kind of a prophet saying goodbye sort of a statement, right? And it is really wonderful to see the depth of his testimony here. And we get it right at the end. And it's interesting because you got to figure he's got the small plates in his possession, and he's just down to the very last little bit, right? And he just needs to kind of sign off with the most important thing that he can think of to share with us. Boom, and here it is. And recall down here in the white, whenever you hear someone from that era saying, "And as the Lord liveth," that's an oath. That is like a solemn, on his soul. This is true, right? And so it's a very strong statement not to be overlooked. So he's done now, right? Nearly. And so this last little bit here, it's funny because to me it seems like maybe there was a little bit of space left in the margin, and he thought, well, maybe I could squeak just this last little detail into this last little space, and then it really is full. And now I would speak, so kind of P.S., and now I would speak somewhat concerning a certain number who went up into the wilderness to return to the land of Nephi, for there was a large number who were desirous to possess the land of their inheritance. Right? So again, they're up here. The Nephites are up in Zarahemla, but there's a large group who, for some odd reason, want to come back down here into Nephi, where the bad guys are, because they figure that they can take back the land that they came from. They like it better for some reason. Who knows? Maybe it's a little crowded up north. Don't know. Wherefore, they went up into the wilderness. See again, up, right? Up into the wilderness on the south. And their leader, being a strong and a mighty man, and a stiff-necked man, never a good thing. Wherefore he caused a contention among them, and they were all slain save 50 in the wilderness. And they returned again to the land of Zarahemla. They were probably lost, right? Who knows what they argued over? We don't know. And it came to pass that they also took others to a considerable number, and took their journeying again into the wilderness. So they're going to take a second crack at this. And I, Amaleki, had a brother who also went with them, and I have not since known concerning them. And I am about to lie down in my grave, and these plates are full, and I make an end of my speaking. And now that's really the end, the end. So, interesting that he would just squeak those last little 4 verses in there. But it was important to him, right? Why? Because he had a brother who left and he never saw him again, right? I'm sure it was really hard for him to see them go, especially knowing you're going with a leader who's a stiff-necked man. Are you sure you want to do this, right? The last time it didn't work out so well. Only 50 came back. And his brother, yeah, I want to go. Are you sure? And so, I assumed that he'd never see his brother again for one reason or another. And so that was tough. Anyways, there you go. That is the end of the book of Omni. And next up in our next segment will be the words of Mormon. But at this point, we are now leaving behind us the small plates of Nephi. Very, very cool little set of plates. And what a wonderful opportunity it has been to study them for 47 sessions. Can you believe it? So we will end as we began. Repeating the words which Amaleki asked us. Do we come unto Christ and partake of his salvation and the power of his redemption? It is there waiting for us, and the blessings are great. And the blessings are now. We don't have to wait. The peace is now. And I hope we do. I hope we do come unto Christ, and I hope we do partake of his salvation and the power of his redemption. And it will guarantee absolutely no, in fact, it will guarantee a challenging and difficult life that is guaranteed, even with the power of his salvation and redemption. But it will be much, much better than it would be otherwise. Thank you very much, and we will see you in the next section talking about the words of Mormon.